Thank you. Welcome. I'm Elizabeth Baker-Keffer. I'm Vice President of the Atlantic, one of your co-hosts for the Aspen Ideas Festival with the Aspen Institute. We're delighted to have all of you here. I'm sorry to say goodbye to the first session pass holders who will be leaving us today, but I hope you've had a great time, and you'll finish it off with a bang. We have the afternoon of conversation in the music tent. The doors will open at 1:30. The sessions begin there at 2 o'clock. So I hope you'll join us for that. And we'll be welcoming a whole new crowd of people who are here for the second session of Ideas Festival. But right now, you are in for a treat. We have a great panel with business leaders and executives who span the globe. The title of the panel is The Real Deal, Economic Opportunities in the Middle East, and it's obviously part of the Middle East track. It will be under the able leadership of Don Presley, who is a Senior Vice President with Booz Allen Hamilton. He is based now in Abu Dhabi and has been based there for a couple of years. He has 10 plus years of experience with Booz Allen Hamilton. He is the general manager and the market lead for their engagements in the Middle East and in North Africa, and has 35 plus years working in consulting terrains and helping governments with efficiency and growth initiatives. So I will turn things over to you, Don, and thanks so much to our panelists, many of whom have traveled a long way to be here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So the real deal, economic opportunities in the Middle East. This morning, our panel will provide some insights on doing business in the Middle East. Is it a land dominated by terrorism, ethnic and religious strife, instability, or if you believe the international media, even a place of chaos? Or is it truly a land of opportunity? This morning, we're going to hear from our panelists about the Middle East youth, about the business environment, about the impact of the oil economy, and other factors that affect their workforces and their businesses. You may be surprised to also hear more about dynamism, optimism, and entrepreneurship than you do about extremism, violence, or upheaval. But I'll leave that to my very able panel to share their experiences and their perspectives on what it means to do business in the Middle East. I'm very excited to be able to introduce this really distinguished and esteemed panel. Immediately to my left is Syed Abdul Latif. He's the Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Saad assumed his current role in September of 2008, and he's responsible for PepsiCo's Asia, Middle East, and Africa sector, a business unit comprising the business across more than 90 countries and almost 3/4 of the world's population. Just a small job. In addition, he is the founder of PepsiCo's Tamu education program, of which the World Food Program is a partner. And he has shepherded PepsiCo's benefactor sponsorship of the Arab International Women's Forum. He sits on the board of Planet Finance, an organization which fights poverty through the development of microfinance, and is the former chairperson of World Link's Arab region, which leverages information and communication technology to educate youth in developing countries. Next to Saad is Fadi Gandour. Fadi is founder and CEO of Aramex International, a position he has held for the past 30 years. Aramex is one of the leading logistics and transportation companies in the Middle East and South Asia. That's just his day job, though. Fadi is a founding partner in Maktub.com, the world's largest Arab online community. He's a member of the board of Abraj Capital, and he serves on the advisory board of the Suleiman S. Alan School of Business at the American University of Beirut. He's the founder and chairman of Ruab for Development, a regional private sector-led community empowerment initiative that helps disadvantaged communities overcome marginalization through youth activism, civic engagement, and education. He is vice chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Jordan River Foundation and chairman of the National
That's history.
History. It's all good.
This is an old TV.
He said we're dynamic.
Yes.
Okay, one more thing.
That's good enough.
In his spare time, he launched the Corporate Entrepreneurship Responsibility, a collaborative movement which aims to lobby, mobilize, and organize private sector efforts in building entrepreneurial ecosystems in the MENA region. And our third panelist, Dr. Mona Hamami. Mona is Senior Manager at the Office of Strategic Affairs, Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Court. She serves as the Socio-Economic Policy Advisory Office covering global and local developments, and she heads the office think tank arm. This is the leader of Abu Dhabi, and this strategic arm provides him on a wide range of policy and strategic advice. And I've seen firsthand some of the work that this group is doing that Mona has led. Prior to joining the Crown Prince office, Mona was a lead associate at Booz & Company and part of their public sector practice team. Before joining Booz & Company, she worked for the International Monetary Fund, where she co-authored a paper on the determinants of public-private partnerships. And she worked on the WTO's TRIPS agreement for Middle East and North Africa countries. She is a recipient of both the HRH Princess Bandari Al Fazl and Sheikh Abdulaziz Al Tawari International Public Service Fellowships. And she's even set up her own graduate fellowship fund at Harvard's Kennedy School to fund an Arab student for a master's in public administration. So you can see what a dynamic, diverse, and wide-ranging panel we have this morning. So I'm going to ask each one of you a question, and then we'll get into some specifics as we start to delve into some of the aspects of doing business in the Middle East. So I'll start with you, Saad. If you would just give us a short perspective on what you see as the real deal, plus, minus, or neutral, for doing business in the Middle East.
Well, thanks. First, thank you for having us over here, and thank you guys for coming, to our session. I'm Palestinian by birth, 60 years old, and I've lived all my 60 years in the region, so that qualifies me, I think, to talk about the region. Let me start by giving you an overview of the region over the last, 10 years, and then I want to talk about it in terms of bright spots, hot spots, as I see it. So, the MENA region, as we define it, North Africa and Middle East, over the last 10 years, population levels went up from 330 million to almost close to 400 million. GDP per capita increased significantly from 3,000 to about 7,800 US dollars over the same period. The average growth rate of the labor force between 2020 and 2010 was about 3-4% increasing annually, twice as high as all other developing regions. This actually amounts to about 40 million net new entrants over the past decades into the Middle East. Now, with that backdrop, I'd like to talk about some of the bright spots as I see it. MENA is has a very rich culture and history, actually over 10,000 years of that art and architecture and history. Tourism has historically provided significant income for the region. More than 15 million are expected to enter the labor force over the next decade, with average annual growth actually of around 2%. Women are becoming a change agents. 2012, 1,105 women actually made the list of the top 500 most influential Arab citizens in Middle East, according to the Arabian Business. Now, for perspective, in 2009, that number was 5 of 100. So if you extrapolate that, it was about 7%. In 2012, right, it's 21%. The MENA population is very young and very energetic, with the highest proportion of people aged below 30. That's the highest in the world. Actually, 65% of the population is below the age of 30. Some people might look at it as the youth bulge, and we'll talk about that later. With that, obviously, there are some hotspots. The That same youth bulge is contributing to the economic potential of MENA and is placing restraints on, on the usage of water and the usage of economy and all that. The numbers tell the story. Actually, our GDP has been growing between, I said, 3 to 4. It has to grow 6% to service the economy and service the growth over. So there is a little bit of a gap there. Education will be a very critical driver of economic expansion. And I don't mean education, just the number of people that go to school and graduate. I mean the system of education and what people are taught and how they are taught that, and how current they are with the world. Prolonged political and policy uncertainty and political and social unrest are serious down risks, to the MENA thing. Things, as you know, with the Arab Springs are changing. I view that as very positive change, that will impact us in the future. Change takes time, but I view it as very positive. Addition, there are environmental concerns, actually, and they're becoming more and more serious. For example, water scarcity is a big issue now, as it's changing actually the landscape of the Middle East countries. We just heard recently about Egypt and Ethiopia, and I use that. It's all about water. The crisis in Syria, with the refugees going into Jordan and into Lebanon, specifically Jordan. More than 500,000 refugees went there, and already putting strains on the economy of that country and on the resources of that country. Especially, we know that water in Jordan is a very scarce resource. So these are, the hot spots that, we'll have to deal with as we work in the Middle East. Being part of that region, as I said, for 60 years, I remain extremely positive about it.
Good.
We've seen a lot of issues over the last 60 years, and we've always come through them. And, a case in point is that over the last 10 years, our GDP, with all the issues that you have, grew from 4 to 6%.
Great. Fadi.
So I'll continue with only the bright spots, if you want. I think. I think you get enough of the dark spots of the region. So you read them in the news every day, and you get them on CNN, etc. But let me go through very quickly about what I think is the most interesting part of the Arab world today. So there's an annual Arab Youth Survey that is published every year, and it tells us what the Arab youth are saying. So their highest concern is fair pay, home ownership, and rising costs of living. Democracy slips down the issues. Terrorism slips down the issues that they have. Their issues are economic. 74% of the youth say their best days are ahead. So they are much more positive and look forward to their future than the older guys or the people that read the news. 90% in low-income countries of the Arab world, meaning the Levant, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Morocco, tell you that hard work will lead to advancement in life. Contrary to our traditional thinking that Arabs think that it is only your connection that gets you places. The Arab youth are telling us that it's okay if we work hard, we are going to get places. 50% of people from the age of 18 to 24 want to start their own business. In America, it's only 5% in that age group. College graduates tell you only 5% want to start their own businesses. In the Gulf, this is a Gulf survey, which is very surprising because 90% of Gulf nationals work in government. But their youth are saying, we would like to be entrepreneurs. Another bright spot. The MIT Business Plan competition, which is done annually in the region, got 4,000 applications this year. That's double what it did a couple of years ago. So an increased number of people that want to actually be in that space. The biggest IPO in the world, which I'm sure you don't know about, was in Iraq this year. Their cellular company, AsiaCell, valued at $5 billion, raised $1.2 billion in the Iraqi market. They didn't even market it outside the Iraqi market. So you will not read about that. You will only read about the bombings in Baghdad. 30% of online internet the Arab world has 30% on internet penetration, which is about 100 million people. 33% say they purchase online. They do e-commerce. People wonder whether there is e-commerce in the Arab world or not. Well, yes, 33% of the people that are online tell you they have bought in the past month at least one item online. YouTube in Saudi Arabia gets 90 million views a day. It's the second largest per capita in the world. And on mobile phones, YouTube in Saudi Arabia gets the highest viewership on earth for YouTube. And then YouTube they had a big delegation because suddenly they were looking at it and saying, wow, there's a Saudi market here. Let's go and explore that. E-commerce is valued at already about $15 billion a year now in the Arab world. And while only 15% of businesses today have online presence. So imagine the opportunity of people wanting to buy online while businesses are still not yet online. Mobile commerce meaning purchasing through your mobile is going to be valued at about $55 billion in the next 3 years. And there's 100% penetration of mobile phones in the Arab world. There's over 350 million people to 400 million people that have mobile phones in the Arab world. So while we hear about Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, we also need to hear about Flat 6 Labs, which is an accelerator that was started by a YPO member in Egypt that is producing a lot of young entrepreneurs who are applying on a daily basis. There is a rush of entrepreneurs in Egypt after the fall of the Mubarak regime. Wa'el Ghunaim, who is the famous internet revolutionary, if you want, is not as revolutionary as you would think he is in terms of going down to the streets. He is building what's something called Tahrir Academy, which is copying the Khan Academy and providing students in public schools in Egypt literacy in mathematics and sciences in Egyptian language, in Arabic language. We obviously don't hear about that, but he has been having millions of viewers of his schools, making it free of charge for all the schools in Egypt. We have our friends here in Aspen that have invited us here to speak, are very active in the Partners for New Beginning. Tony Verstanding, you can talk to her about it. They send delegations from here to the Arab world. They are mentors. They have become part of some of them are investors now in the region. The Syria war you hear about every day and the destruction in Syria, but you don't hear about how Jordanians have hosted 30 entrepreneurs to come and sit at Oasis 500, which is a Jordanian-launched accelerator to start businesses in Jordan. It's not big, 30, but it's hopeful. It says that there is another narrative. It says that there is people that want to do things. In Jaz al-Arab, I'm going through a lot of this stuff because I need you to know that there are many, many activities that are happening in the Arab world other than what you're reading. In Jaz al-Arab, which is an organization that is also supported by Aspen, that wants to teach entrepreneurship for kids in high schools, has already had hundreds of thousands of kids learn entrepreneurship skills in high schools before they graduate, so that they are ready for the marketplace once they graduate. Because the biggest challenge in the Arab world is what do you do with those kids that are graduating with skills that do not match the marketplace and the job requirements. And in Jordan, my home country, the ICT sector, the technology sector, in a public-private partnership 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, when His Majesty became king, our friend Karim Qawar here launched an initiative called the REACH Initiative, which basically said, here's the 5-6 things that you need to do to make Jordan as the hub of internet and technology entrepreneurship in the Arab world, which is what it is today. Today, because of that initiatives, we have the ICT industry is 25% growth every year over year, the highest in the country. It contributes 14% of our GDP. It has created 84,000 jobs directly and indirectly. And it has proved that there is hope in public-private partnerships in solving issues. It's not only a public matter, because the public sector cannot manage all the challenges that we are facing. When the private sector introduces its innovation and its capabilities and entrepreneurial skills, it is going to have to create opportunities rather than challenges. So these are great stories. They're very hopeful. Lots of things are happening in the Arab world. So it's not only about destruction. There is a new book that's coming out, which is, I think, the first book that's coming out by an American entrepreneur, Chris Schroeder, based in Washington, D.C., called Startup Rising. Chris, who's a friend of mine, went for 2 years and researched and met probably every single entrepreneur in the region, and he has written a fantastic book which is going to be published anytime now. So it's a must-read if you want to know about the entrepreneurial landscape in the Arab world. So a new story. I'll leave for MENA to tell us a different narrative maybe. But yeah, we're hopeful.
Mana, thank you for balancing some of the gray hair here on this stage. We're very
no hair.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me here. I guess I'm going to provide a slightly different perspective simply because I'm taking more from a policy perspective, being as part of the public sector. But maybe I'll start off by giving you the Middle East in numbers. And I want to start off by saying the Middle East could be sliced and diced in endless numbers of ways. I can say geographically, Middle East and North Africa. I can say the GCC versus the Levant. I can say by income levels, high income, low income, and you have even LDCs such as Yemen and Sudan. Endless ways of looking at it. And the reason I say that is because it's really hard for me to even think of opportunities and ways forward by not keeping that in mind. There's so much differences across the region that it's hard for us to think of one solution for all. Having said that, there are common themes that come across in all of them. But just to give you a sense of the numbers and just to add up to what Saad has said, so 400 million, a bit less than 400 million is the population. 6% of the total global population actually is the Middle East. GDP-wise, it's 4% of total world GDP. It's around 3 trillion. Just to give you a sense, 3.1 trillion is less than the GDP of the fourth biggest country, which is Germany, of 80 million. So, it's a large in terms of population, not so much in terms of the GDP that you're talking about. 60 to 70% of the oil of the world is in the region. 40 to 50% of the natural gas, proven reserves are in the region too. You're looking at an economy which is made up of 11% of the manufacturing sector, the lowest in the world. Services, the lowest in the world, of around 45%. The majority comes still from industry, and by industry I mean mining and quarrying, which is oil industries, and that's obviously distorted by if I lump the entire region into the oil exporting countries. Basically, you're looking at lagging in so many ways in terms of the industrialization of those economies, and you're still, even on the service sector, I mean that varies by country, but even on the service sector you're still lagging on that sense. Now, what are the things that come out across as being the major things, both as challenges and opportunities that come across the region? Obviously, the number one we've talked about, 22% of the population is between the ages of 15 and 24. That's your youth bulge that we were talking about. That goes up to, in 2030, 94 million. That's the peak, and it starts going down after that. Basically, you need to create around 100 million jobs on the next decade. If that's assuming reduces the 15% unemployment rate that you have, going up to 28% unemployment rate among the youth. That's the highest in the world. That's actually not unique to the region. So if you look across the world, you find the EU has around 22% unemployment rate among the youth. And in countries like Greece and Spain, that goes up to 50%. So really, it's not a unique kind of phenomena. In Asia, it goes down to 9.4%. But what's unique about the youth unemployment, and that's all across the region, is that if you are more educated in the Middle East, you're likely to be, that's kind of a cost to you. 30%, up to 30% of the unemployed have a tertiary education. The problem is that you have a skill mismatch, both whether you're overqualified or underqualified. In countries like Tunis, for instance, if you have an education, actually really a scientist or an engineering background, you go into the economy does not create jobs that are suitable for you. So it has not kept up with that pace. If you look into other countries like the GCC, you're actually just not picking the right degrees. You go into humanities where the market actually needs a bit more on sciences and engineering. So really a mismatch going through. The second unique distinction about unemployed youth in the region is that it's usually around the world young people are unemployed for a short period of time because they get the first job that comes to their, that they can get their hands on. In the Middle East, people look for the best job that they need, so they wait a bit longer. So youth unemployment is actually more long-term duration. That has a huge effect on the career and human capital development of the region because the longer you stay, that has, it's proven to have, over the lifetime, a worse effect. The third thing that is very unique about the youth unemployment is the rise of the middle class in the region. And you might ask the question of the middle class, what is the middle class? There's endless numbers of definition of what the middle class is. The definition that is used more often is now people getting per day between $2 and $13. That's around 240 million in the Middle East. Now, what's unique about the middle class in emerging markets, it seems to be they're big consumers, entrepreneurs, higher human capital, people that want democracy. In the region, you're not finding much of that. So they're still not consuming as much. They're still, entrepreneurship is picking up more and more, but the human capital formation is not necessarily, what you're actually really still seeing. So you're looking at an opportunity because you have a very large part of the youth, but still is, with all the issues around it, it's still a challenge, if we don't get it right. The second issue that I would like to talk about, so youth unemployment is one. The second one is women's participation in the labor force. Not because I'm a woman, but actually I do think it's a big deal for the region. It has the lowest, again, participation rate in the world of 26% women. It grows at around 0.71 percentage points every year. Extremely low. Even South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are higher rates of that. What is the issue with that? The issue is that women in the region have actually picked up so much on other indicators. So fertility rates have gone down. If you look at enrollment rates between men and women, it's around 0.96, very close. Women tend to go into higher education a lot more than men do. But the problem is this has not translated into the labor force. If you were to run sort of a regression analysis and see if people were to maintain that educational aspect, what would be the effect of women on the labor force? If you get women into the labor force with that education level, household income in the Middle East would increase by 25%. So that's a big deal. Simply because if you think about women, right now every man has to service a household which is made up of more than one or two people because his wife doesn't work. So there's a reduction if this woman goes into the labor force of the dependency ratio. The third thing that I'd like to talk about is trade integration. And by trade integration and in general economic integration, the Middle East is not integrated to the rest of the world. It's a limited globalization. So even more important is within the region, you find 10% of the exports of the region are intra-regional, 16% of the exports, 16% of the imports are intra-regional. So there's very little movement. It's very thin trade, thick borders in the region. Which is a big problem. And you can look at economic integrations in so many ways. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is diversification of the economies. Clearly, in so many parts of the world, you're still, particularly the GCC, although there's a bit of a reduction in the oil GDP, you're still finding it hard to move away from that sector. In other economies, you're not moving towards the value-added, industries. You can think even of agriculture, agribusiness going in, tourism, much more things into that sort. So these are like the main challenges within, but I think, obviously the outcomes are very different.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So
I want to pick on the women one, which I think is absolutely,
Pick on the women.
absolutely the woman point. This is absolutely right and absolutely the right thing. And I'm a big advocate of that. I'm a member of the Arab International Women Forum, which talks about women empowerment. At PepsiCo, we have proved there is a business case. When you employ in our line of products, women are our consumers. These are the ones that they go and buy. So you can imagine us sitting around trying to launch a product, 5 or 6 men sitting around the table trying to design what the package should be for that woman. And then we come up with a package that's not friendly for that woman, and we wonder why. So, one of the biggest issues actually, to Mona's point, is why women do not come into the labor force, although they have the education or that. I think there is a role for the private sector to play, and as we have a role to do that. Actually, the working environment is not friendly for women. Okay, in what sense? There is a work-life balance. I mean, the woman in the Arab world is expected to be a working woman and also expected to take care of home. How can we enable them to do that? Can we make policies actually that allow us to work a day or two, from home, given the technology that we have? Do we allow them to come late at work at 10 and serve, till 6 rather than come at 8 and leave at 4? So give her time with her children and give her time to prepare for home. So I think there is a role for the private sector, Mona, to play, and the private sector is an enabler to women's employment. But we really have to change the policies around how we make that environment friendly for women to work. And we have started, and I'm very proud to tell you that at PepsiCo in the Middle East, 30% of our managers are
Yeah.
women.
Managers, excellent.
Yeah, at the manager level.
Fadi, you mentioned the high number of graduates who want to be entrepreneurs. What do you see as some of the sort of obstacles or issues, challenges that they face, and any thoughts around progression in that regard?
So I think, well, the biggest challenge is the education system, I think. Building the skill set for these young graduates to be able to, one, to have a decent job that is required by the marketplace, and at the same time have the skills that you were, the critical skills, critical thinking skills, and financial literacy skills that you don't get, technology skills that you don't necessarily get in schools or in universities, so that you are ready to build your business. Now that's one challenge. So education is a big story in the Arab world. The other one is to have a much more active private sector to invest. Access to capital is a huge issue in the Arab world. There are some angel investor networks that are popping up in the region. Very little venture capital. It's starting to pour in now, but there is not enough to support the demand in the marketplace. A lot of entrepreneurs are coming out and require funding to scale. There is plenty of private equity money in the Arab world. So a lot of privatization, a lot of money going into building infrastructure and building physical assets, but they don't go into providing risk capital for these entrepreneurs. Banks in the Arab world, 70% of businesses in the Arab world are small and medium-sized enterprises.
Anyway.
But access to debt from banks is only 8% of the bank loans. So there is a massive mismatch between that. In the UAE, it's 4% to SMEs. So there is, this is a big challenge. Access to what I think the private sector need to do is access to mentorships and access to more internships. So when you are not ready for the job market, the best way for you to actually get ready is by doing. And doing is by going into private sector jobs that get you ready, work in the summers so that when you graduate, you understand the marketplace. A big challenge for our youth is that not only they don't have the skills, but there is a problem with appreciating the value of work. So work ethic, not ethics, work ethic. So absenteeism is massive in some Gulf countries. So they get paid for their salaries in some Gulf countries in the public sector, but they don't show up, and they're not probably expected to show up. It's a big issue. When we are challenged in localizing our labor, so there is a big movement in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries that tell us you have to have a certain percentage of your people that are nationals. And we would love to, these multinationals like us, Pepsi-Cola, Aramex, other companies would love to hire nationals. We don't want to hire expatriates, but we need them to be capable and wanting, not only capable. We need them to be wanting to work. So that's also a learnable skill. Right. There is nothing cultural about the challenges. So I would tell you, let's put this cultural story to bed forever. You learn. Everything is learnable, including entrepreneurship, including work ethic, including appreciating the job market that you don't get. These are the challenges that I think entrepreneurs have. The other big challenge, which Mona had mentioned, is opening up the markets. The biggest hurdles for trade in the Arab world is among the Arab countries. So Jordan would have a free trade agreement with the United States of America, and Bahrain would have a free trade agreement with the US or with Singapore, but we don't have intra-Arab free trade agreements. The Arab League proposed the issue of a grand Arab market, open market, long before the EU even thought about it. It is the longest talked about issue in history. And we still have obstacles to, how are you going to scale? How are you going to scale businesses that start in Jordan or start in Lebanon or start in Palestine or start in Egypt or Morocco if you are not able to export to your neighbors? Jordanians are not going to produce products that sell to the United States. Maybe a few. but it's going to sell a lot of products to Saudi Arabia, to Syria, to Iraq. You will find, once a market is open, you will find a flood of exports. So Jordan and Iraq, for instance, have a huge open market amongst themselves. Iraq today is the second biggest trading market with Jordan. Jordanians produce products that are in demand in the marketplace in Iraq. That's a massive hurdle. And part of it is a private sector challenge, because it's not only the public sector that says, I want to build these hurdles. It is the protectionism mentality of the private sector that says, you know, I don't want to compete. I want you to open the Jordanian market for me, but Saudi Arabia, no, it's going to be closed. You know, I want to export to Jordan, but nobody should export to Saudi Arabia, or vice versa. So I'm not challenging any of these countries. And then foreign ownership laws in the Gulf.
Yeah.
That's the biggest, a big challenge, because the Gulf is the biggest market, highest income, highest purchasing power. If we're not able to go and set up businesses in the Gulf that are 100% foreign owned, foreign meaning it could be American, it could be Arab, it could be French, who cares?
Right.
The challenge in the Gulf is not about foreign investors bringing capital, because there is massive trillions of dollars in the Gulf in their sovereign wealth funds. They don't need our money. But what they need is two things. One, our entrepreneurial capabilities and skills so that we build businesses and hire their own people. Number two, knowledge. Transfer of knowledge from companies in the West is much more valuable for us from a dollar that comes from the United States of America. And that is not going to happen unless you're going to allow these companies to own 100% of their businesses, because they need control. Right. I don't want to be under the patronage of local sponsors, because the law tells me you can't do business in that country unless you're sponsored by someone locally. And that is a private sector challenge, because the private sector in some Gulf countries is lazy, doesn't want to compete, so they don't open up their marketplace. No, you know, that's the truth. And I say it when I'm in Dubai, and I say it while I'm here. So it is of huge benefit for these Gulf economies, for their competitiveness as economies, to allow foreign investors to come and set up their businesses over there.
But I want to come back to Saad's point about the opportunity for women in the Middle East, and is the public policy moving in that direction? Are you seeing change, or are there barriers that make it even more hard for women than we kind of hear in the normal press?
I think the barriers are on so many fronts. You have the cultural, social, barriers. You have the legal barriers. You have the, political and economic barriers to that. And there has a bit of a movement towards remedying some of these issues. And I'll give you some examples of that. So maybe I'll take the entrepreneurship side of women particularly at that point. And it's women entrepreneurs are facing more problems than men entrepreneurs are in the region. I'll give you an example of resolving a conflict in Egypt with a woman in terms of setting up her own business takes 84 days. With men, it takes around 50 days. So things like that. You have less mentorship on the women front. You get loans from microfinance, which are smaller in size than men get it. So you still have the system has not adjusted very well for women entrepreneurs in one sense. The other are obviously cultural barriers where women, for instance, cannot move geographically from, I'll give you the example of the UAE, where women in Al Ain find it very hard to move to Abu Dhabi, the center of the economic activity. So as such, you need to create jobs in Al Ain for them to be able to work, just because their parents don't allow them to move, as much. You have legal barriers, such as, paternal leave and maternity leave for women is around 2 months in the UAE, much less than any other country you look at. You don't have flexi time that Saad has talked about. Look at the Nordics, have the best example of actual flexi time where women can actually even work from homes. So a lot of these adjustments have not happened yet. You still see some of it happening, but not as much as you'd hope. Women are generally much more educated, in fact, than men, and I can talk about the GCC in general, but it requires an entire system kind of adjustment. And I'd have to reiterate that the women issues are global issues. You have a 3 million kind of issue around the globe. It's not just the Middle East. Added to the Middle East, I think, is a bit of those cultural barriers that make it hard, and it will take some time for adjustment to happen. Having said that, and being a woman, and I often say that from women from the Middle East, often asked why, has it been hard for you to reach where you are? And I always answer that gender has never been something that I identify myself with. I've worked really hard for where I was, and I got all the opportunities I wanted. So it is a place where opportunities can happen. It just needs some time and adjustment, I guess.
Let me add just one thing on microfinance. There is something that's not known. There is about $3 billion in microloans in the Arab world today for over about 100 million people. 85% of them are women. Payback is 98%. Payback is 98%. So women are reliable. They pay back. They are much more responsible.
Contrary to popular opinion.
I'll tell you why. I mean, there is a science behind it, because the woman is the one that takes care of the home. The husband will pack his bags if he has economic hardship and go somewhere else. We have a lot of single mom homes which you don't hear about. They go out, they borrow these three. The average loan in the Arab world is about $400, $500. And while people tell you, as opposed to the small and medium-sized enterprises getting loans from banks. So these micro loan organizations, which are local, by the way, these are homegrown enterprises that have gone out and said, I don't want collateral. I will bet on these women to pay back. And you know why they pay back? Because they want to send their kids to school. They want to bring food on the table, much more than the father. I am a father, and I bring food to the home. But that is why they pay back. That we were wondering. Men don't pay back as much as women do. They feel that they can get away with it. Yep. They feel that they can get away with it.
Fadi and I are on Planet Finance in the Middle East.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm on the board, and he's an advisor to the board, and I attest to what always said. I think that the private sector here has a huge role to play in building entrepreneurship in the Arab world and helping out that. Planet Finance wouldn't have happened without the private sector coming to help and make actually available these loans to all people that need them. And here we're talking about not massive amount of loans. We're talking about $400, $500 that enables women specifically to set her own shop and go from there. There is one thing that I want to add to what Fadi said on why entrepreneurship in the Arab world is not successful and why...
I didn't say it's not successful. I said it has challenges.
It has challenges? Yes. Okay. Use of words. You're the positive guy. I am the more realistic one. Okay.
That's why I am much more investing in entrepreneurs than you are.
So on access to capital, the banks do not, it's a very small amount of loans that are available to these guys actually come from banks. And the reason for that is the risk of failure. One of it, failure is very punishing, and they put stringent payback periods on them. They put stringent laws on how they pay the loans. And when a person goes to start acting, and the first thing he's worried about is, how do I pay my first installment? So that's one. The second is I feel there is lack of innovation. So a lot of the banks, I speak with a couple of bankers that talk about this, and we discuss the issue. Part of the projects that come to these banks are very repetitive, and there is nothing new about them. So you'll have a guy trying to set a shop for making clothes, and then you will know that 25 or 30 people will come with the same idea. So innovation needs to play a big role in enabling entrepreneurship. And that's a role where I think the governments can play in their budgets. If you look at the budgets of government and their 10-year plan or their 20-year plan, I don't think there's an item which is earmarked for innovation and for enabling youth. So again, in order to enable entrepreneurships and make the banks come forward, we will have to diversify what the projects are, and we'll have to enable innovation by the private sector and by the government.
Yeah, there is a soft side, soft infrastructure. So there are no bankruptcy laws in the Arab world. So if you go bankrupt, you might go to jail. If a check bounces in some countries, you will be...
It's a criminal offense.
You will be, yes, you will be criminalized. So it's not only a question of a culture of fear of failure, because people say in the Arab world we fear failure. I don't buy that. There is someone that said well, it's a political statement, but it says, if Arabs are fearful of failure, why do they keep the same leaders that have failed them over the years in the same place? So
I think choice.
But no, it's a look. There is no fear of failure. There is fear in understanding what it means to fail. That's education. You learn that. you learn that failing and standing up and persevering is something that you need to acquire that. It's a skill in my view. It's not your parents, how they talk to you, that your teacher, how he teaches you. These are the challenges. And that's what I would like to add to Saad in that perspective.
I've gotten the time sign that it's time to open it to questions from the floor. We have a couple of microphones that are moving around, so just raise your hand. We'll go to this lady right here, and we'll try to mix the questions as much as we can.
I'm Samia Farouki, and thank you all for a wonderful discussion. My point is to you, Mona. You identified certain issues about Arab women. And I'm very eager to clarify this because Arab women are giving a very bad rap most of the time. I'm an Arab American woman, and I think they're exceptional women. And all the issues, by the way, I sit on the board of Vital Voices, which empowers women, and the Washington Area Women's Foundation. And all the issues that you have identified are exactly what we deal with in this country, in the United States. So, I mean, they're not at all specific to Arab women. Mm-hmm. So I think they're all over the world, they're universal.
Absolutely.
Mona, want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I did mention that, again, that the 3 million women around the world share the same issues. So it is a big issue, I think, globally. I think the size of the issue is a bit larger in the region, simply because if you look at the labor force participation, it's extremely low. Yeah, to a large extent, but it's, I mean, the reason I say that is because as part of the region, the reason I highlighted this as an issue is not because women in the Arab world are facing other issues than the other women around the world are not facing, but actually because within the region, it has a great impact if you actually address it. Because Arab women are a major productive, part of the economy and could add, as I mentioned before, 25% to the household income. So you can imagine how great integrating them in. So I'm not highlighting them as an issue, rather as an opportunity for moving forward, which is a global issue, I think, as you mentioned. But in the case of the Middle East, is a much more of an opportunity than a challenge to me. It's, if you address it, you would be addressing a lot more than you think.
Question here.
Thank you. I was going to stand up. Hi, I'm Shelley Porgas, Washington, D.C., with the Ready for Hillary PAC. Also, most recently, as of 3 months ago, I left the State Department. As Fadi knows, we work together in the Middle East as head of the director of the Global Entrepreneurship Program. A lot of our work, a lot of President Obama's work has been in the Middle East. We all know that he launched an entrepreneurship initiative. He had a summit in D.C. in 2009, followed by various summits, including in Dubai most recently, which I was very involved in. But to Mona's point about the 100 million jobs that are needed for the youth in the region, what can we do to scale? We know that there are these fantastic efforts like Flat 6 in Egypt and Oasis 500 in Jordan and so forth, but what can be done to scale? Because we're talking about 100 million jobs by 2020 in order to stay even, not even to improve. We've got to do better than that, and that's certainly what we were about, and looking forward to your insights.
So why don't you talk about it from the large company perspective, and then I'll
start with that. And I think the private sector has a big role to do in that, enabling, providing training, taking more bets on people and projects. We do that. I mean, contrary to what you said, when you do entrepreneurships, we also we do
I
a
knew
lot
you were
of that.
going to come back at me.
So in each one of the countries, actually, we have set programs. If you take Egypt, for every year, there's something which calls Accelerate. And we go to university students who just graduated, and we take about 25, 30, or 50, sometime of them, and we'll have them work on projects, for us with a salary. It's not just an internship and the handout. It's really a job that we train. And you know what? We might keep 5 or 10 of them, and another 40 might go and do something else outside with other companies. So I think that the private sector has a huge role in partnering with the government. A lot of times we would think that it's the government's jobs to create all this and do it, and I think it's wrong. And in our case, we have done, it worked, and we have enabled actually and created jobs. We'll be happy to work with you also in President Obama's initiative and take it to the private sector and work together in doing that.
Fadi?
So I agree with Saad. So. But it's a massive challenge. So I think it can only be solved in a public-private partnership. Today, most of the issues are being addressed by the public sector. I think that's very challenging. I don't think, with all due respect, that the public sector understands what the job markets require. They don't know what's out there. They know what's in the public sector. You know, the ILO, International Labour Organization, came out with a report at the beginning of this year that says our global education system, so it's not only us, global education systems educate for public sector jobs. So it's a massive challenge. No, these kids, the people that are going to generate the jobs are two, and they're both in the private domain. One is companies that are in the SME space. The biggest generators of jobs are SMEs, not the big companies. A lot of us are increasing our hire, but it's SME space. Number two, it is entrepreneurs that are going to be in the business of generating jobs, not only looking for jobs. And for you to be an entrepreneur today, as we had mentioned in the Arab world, today we would hear about Saudi Arabian government and the UAE government and every government pumping a lot of cash since the Arab Spring, if we want to call it that, or the Arab change, or the Arab upheaval, or the whatever you want to call it. The amount of money that is pumped into the entrepreneurship space is not as much as I'd like it, but it comes from the public sector, thinking it's trendy and it's good and it's going to create jobs. In fact, it's distorting the market, because these kids that are receiving money from the public sector are looking at them as grants. And people that think that this money is grant is not in the business of sustainable development. So they think they can get away with not paying back or pay back or have a return on investment with the public sector. So the only way a government cannot deploy cash or capital. It needs to be in partnership with the private sector, bring in venture capital funds, provide them with seed capital. They can match it in the private sector, and it needs massive amounts. There are trillions of dollars in the sovereign wealth funds in the Arab world. If we think this is a massive, daunting task, then it needs a massive response from us. As we spend billions of dollars in building the tallest buildings on earth, we need to spend a fraction of that on building the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Number two, a fraction of what we spend on the military spending in the Arab world, a fraction, 1%. We're the highest spenders on earth on military equipment. That a lot of it comes from this country. If we spend a fraction of that on building our businesses, then we are going to solve the entrepreneurs. So our solution is in-house. We know them. We just need to go out and do them. There is no magic in this. The formula has been written. Go out and do it.
Anna.
Yeah, I think I'll probably give you a more public policy kind of answer to that. But
You'll be much more diplomatic.
so basically, there's a lot of ways, but essentially, you can't get the 100 million except if you grow it around, you were talking 6 to 7% growth rate. That's like almost like what the tigers were growing at, which means a complete revamping of your economies. Right now, most of your sectors are just about subsistence and low-end kind of jobs, so they do not create much. And I did mention trade because trade allows you to be more competitive and allows you to create more jobs. But having said that, and on the entrepreneurship side, as a public policy, from the public policy perspective, what's happening in the region is a lot of the new entities that you're creating are micro enterprises, 1 to 9 people, not big employers, much more for necessity reasons. If you think of entrepreneurship in the bigger sense of it, creating innovation, being export competitive, all of this is not happening. So your policy is not only on making people enter into the entrepreneurship space, but also scaling that up, which happens all across the world. I'll give you the example of the UAE, people that get funding from the Khalifa Fund, which gives micro, loans for firms. 90% of those people have another job in the public sector. So they're just doing it on the side, opening, this yogurt shop or not. Exactly. So it's, need a change of mentality. And just as Fadi said, if they know that they have this job, in the government, which is highly paid, they will not try to move. And that's probably a GCC specific kind of intervention, but you're talking about that entrepreneurship side. But more than just entrepreneurship, a revamping of doing business, your access to finance, financial instruments, you highly undiversified. Banks are your only way of getting in. informal sector employs 70% of the people. So people actually, 90% of people in Tunisia have piece of land that is actually legalless. So basically they cannot borrow, because this is all debt capital, they cannot borrow as a collateral on it. So you're talking about a complete change of policy perspective. I don't think it's an easy solution. I don't think it's just the private sector needs to employ more. I mean, government public policy needs to be completely revamped around the region, just to be able to move out of this flow. Obviously with the private sector, I mean, withdraw of the public a bit from the economies too. I mean, particularly in the GCC countries, government and semi-government are the major drivers of the economy still.
Yes, right here.
Hello, I'm from Los Angeles. And I want to thank the panelists because I've really learned a lot and making me think a great deal and all. I've been to the Middle East several times. But my question is, and I wanted to say to Mona and to what Mona said, and I agree with the woman that's sitting in front of me, that the problems are universal for women. There's no question about it, that as you spoke about the problems in the Middle East for women, I was thinking it's the same problems here.
Right.
And I know that it's not a homogeneous place, the Middle East, but one thing you didn't speak about, and perhaps you don't want to, it's okay, but the culture, changing the culture so that women have the respect perhaps that they need, or the ability to leave the house, to get help in that, whatever they need, and to be also in the government more. So what is being done there in those respects?
Yeah, so basically, actually, I would have to say, and I did mention cultural a bit, but I would say that women actually have the freedom to work, and they do come to work. It's just that balancing life and work is a hard piece, and the problem in the Middle East, simple things such as having a nursery at work does not exist. You don't have laws, helping you to do so. Women in the government is a high percentage of your employees in the region. Particularly, actually, women prefer to work in the government because it's shorter hours, it's safer. So for many people, it's a big employer within the government. I think, it will take time for it to culturally sometimes change, that perspective, but I do feel like it has been changing. As an office, more than 50% of the people that work with us are women, and they are the smartest that you can imagine, and most hardworking. So it's just a matter of time for this to be scaled up a bit more and go across more the region.
And as we look at cultural issues in Saudi Arabia, because it's the biggest challenge, so and we're sensitive in talking about it, but yes, it's a massive challenge, the issues in Saudi Arabia. But I can tell you also something else, that the largest private sector company in Saudi Arabia is run by a woman, Lubna Ulayyan.
Yeah.
So it's one of the biggest companies in the Arab world, led by a woman. So change is happening. 30 women today are in the Consultative Council of Saudi Arabia, which is their parliament, if you want. So there are movements for change. I agree with you. It's a massive challenge. But it also changes from country to country. In Jordan, it's a different challenge. In Egypt, it's a different challenge.
I want to take a different perspective on it, actually. It is most of a myth that working women in the Arab world, it doesn't have the respect of the people and the culture. It's not. I can tell you that because I've worked with women. I see women working in our area, whether in Jordan or Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, or all these places. I think the biggest issue was, how do we, because like it or not, the woman in the Arab world, from a cultural point of view or not, if she works, she's still expected to do the job at home. And that's, I don't know, maybe in the US, there is more tolerance of a man doing something at home or whatever. In the Arab world, I'll tell you, it's a taboo, big taboo. And he'd rather be dead than be seen cooking in the kitchen.
We will not wash the dishes.
That's why we go and buy dishwasher, But I think the biggest enabler to women empowerment in the workforce is really having policies that makes the working environment friendly and adaptive. And, when we start that, it's amazing, how many people will come and work, women specifically. In Saudi Arabia, there isn't a law that says women cannot work, right? There isn't. But there are a lot of things and taboos put around it that makes it very difficult. So what we did, actually, we've studied what are these taboos, And we provided and solved them. And right now, we have more than 40 women working in our company in Saudi Arabia. They wanted to have a separate entrance. They wanted to have a special room where they cannot mingle with men and whatever. It's fine. We can do that and still have a productive session and have a productive, executive working. And once we did that, a lot of companies actually saw that example and started following and doing more of it. So
When we wanted to do our customer call center in Saudi Arabia, we said we're going to do that and hire women. So they said it's crazy. Women in Saudi Arabia are not going to handle customer calls and complaints. And today we have 40 women doing our customer service center in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. So it's changing. It's by necessity. It's not a cultural issue. It's by necessity. It's a question of survival today. Women have to be part of the economic cycle.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Just as always happens, you get into these very interesting debates, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much, panel, for doing such a terrific job.
thank you.